Can we look at a critter and understand a little bit more about it and when we see its face? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the North Woods talking about being a neighborhood naturalist right outside our front door. This happened to me recently. I saw an interesting chart that showed this lineup of bird beaks, seed beaks, hooked carrion beaks, long probing beaks, and a filtering beak. And underneath each one, it sort of talked about the purpose of the bird and that you can see inside of its face. And for one second, I thought about it. You know, the whole story right there. Sometimes you don't need a whole field guide to understand what this bird is about. Or you don't even need maybe a book or a field guide or something like that. You just need to look at the face, and the face will tell you what the bird or the animal is up to. So today we're going to talk about some major categories of faces and what exactly it means when we see a particular shape of a face. We're going to step outside of birds also and look at some reptiles and mammals as well. It's the same kind of rules, right? Just different animals. And by the end of this, I hope that you'll have a new understanding that when you look at the face of a critter, try to figure out what it means. Before you start looking at the color and the size, check out the face. And it'll save you more time than you think when you're trying to identify what something is. So the first one that we're going to talk about is that you've probably seen seed eaters often without even realizing it. They have short, thick, conical beaks. Think of cardinals, finches, sparrows, those kinds of things. This beak is basically a nutcracker built right into their face. It's short so that it can leverage power. The shorter the beak is, the more crushing force it has, and it can generate right there at the tips. It's kind of how when you have a short wrench, it gives you more torque, but you didn't know that. Where you're closer to the bolt, right? You see big, gigantic wrenches. You have a lot of power when it's short. Northern cardinals can crack seeds that you would have to use actual tools to. We can't even crack them open. And here's a detail that I loved while investigating this, is that there's a lot of seed-eating birds that have this hard edge ridge inside of the upper bill, which is called a tomial tooth. And in finches, it's specifically a tooth that is on the palate itself. It'll wedge into that seed, into the groove of the seed, and then bite down hard, rotating the seed and sort of peeling the shell right off of it. And then the tongue flicks the husk out, keeping the kernel. It's not about crushing it as much as it's almost like a seed processing machinery hidden inside the stubby little beak. You know, I eat pistachios in the shell, and half the time I'm like, can't get this one open. Birds, they're really good at it. And so the next time you see that thick, short, cone-shaped beak, immediately in your brain think seed eater. That is built like a pair of pliers, not like a pair of tweezers. What's nice about it is that also tells you, is this bird going to come to my feeder? Should I plant different types of seed plants in my backyard to feed them? Or is this bird looking for something else? Then comes the precision probers. So let's look at the opposite end of things. Long, thin, delicate beaks. Think of hummingbirds are the obvious one we think of. There's some warblers that are there too, but shorebirds play in this category too. A hummingbird's beak isn't really a straw, even though people will often describe it like a straw. It's more like a pair of forceps with a grooved tongue that actually does the sipping. The tongue can flick in and out through that beak, and something like 10 or 20 times a second when it's feeding. The beak itself is just there to get the tongue deep into the flower without the bird needing to stick its tongue out of its whole head. Shorebirds too, like dowitchers and godwits, they have a long, thin beak, and the idea is it's turning into a sensing tool. The tip of their bills are loaded with a lot of nerve endings, and so they can feel a worm wiggling around, a clam moving in the wet sand without looking at it. The same way that you might be able to put a glove on your hand and then reach into the sand, you still could feel something there, right? You'd feel something if it was wiggling around. So the beak isn't just for long reach, it's also a sensing organ at the very tip that needs to get down deep into the mud. And long and thin also doesn't, like I said, mean nectar, because obviously the shorebirds are not eating nectar. Sometimes, in the case of the shorebirds, it means I'm a living metal detector for invertebrates. I can go through and probe into the sand and find something to eat. Then comes the terror. And I mean like tearing, like not terror, but hooked carrion predator beaks. And this is the one that we think of most often. Like that one makes the most sense to us because you probably remember that where there's a sharp downward hook. You see that in hawks, eagles, owls, vultures. And the beak shape has one job: to tear whatever it caught into smaller pieces, small enough for it to swallow, small enough for its babies to swallow. It's not built for killing. That's the job of the talons, actually, in most raptors. But the beak is able to be like a knife that shows up afterwards and be able to process whatever it is they caught. And in the case of some vultures, someone else's kill too. So the hooked part of the tip lets the bird get a grip on whatever it's grabbing and pull it back. And it's kind of gruesome. But, compared to us, we sort of have flat teeth and a jaw that's built for grinding on the side. The hawk's beak, or the carrion beak, doesn't grind anything. It's a one-directional tool. So it's meant for more like ripping. And vultures take it even further. Many species have little or no feathers on its head or neck, so that it can get like face deep into a carcass without getting all that material into its feathers and, breeding bacteria. So the bald head isn't meant to be ugly. It's meant for hygiene purposes. So interesting, huh? And then you get the filtered feeders. And it's not the best way to describe it, but think about ducks and spoonbills. And a lot of dabbling ducks have these kind of combed ridges along the sides of their beak. And the ducks can take a mouthful of water and mud and then use its tongue like a piston and push the water back out. And those ridges straining out seeds, tiny invertebrates, plant material, and keeping what's edible. So it's like a how you strain your noodles kind of thing. And the spoonbills take on this to a more extreme piece because they have wide, flat, spoon-shaped tips. So they're able to sweep their beak through shallow waters with it slightly open without touching, and when it touches something like a small fish or a crustacean, the bill snaps shut and instantly grabs whatever it is that they detected as it was sweeping through. Again, like a metal detector at the beach with a claw at the end, so it can capture something. But then we have the chisels, and these are kind of interesting. You think about woodpeckers, they kind of have their own special mention because their whole face is about engineering and not the beak itself. The beak is straight, short, and incredibly strong. It can absorb repeated impacts into wood, and rather than crushing something or grabbing something. The beak isn't the widest part. The woodpeckers have a specialized skull structure that has this crazy long tongue that wraps around the back of their head when not in use. So it goes all the way down the back of their head and out through their mouth. And what helps cushion, and this strap helps cushion the brain from the repeated shocks of pecking. Bam, 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 right? We couldn't do that. We would get a headache, but they don't get headaches. Some researchers have pointed out that a small amounts of this give built into the structure of the connecting the beak to the skull absorbs the impact too. So when you see a woodpecker hammering on a tree, you're just not looking at a tough beak. You're looking at an entire head structure designated as a shock-absorbing equipment built on one repetitive task. Bam, 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 bam. So it's cool, right? So then we have the spears. Those are going to be the herons, the kingfishers. It's a different kind of beak than what we've talked about before. Egrets are in that category too. This beak is long, straight, and is dagger sharp. It's built for one explosive strike, then grinding and tearing at whatever it caught. The heron will stand, and it's really cool if you ever get a chance to watch them. Egrets too. They just sort of stand. and they're just looking and they're looking and they're looking, and they'll stand there not moving, which seems like forever, and then unfolds their neck like a spring. Phew. And then the beak shuts on a fish in a fraction of a second. Kingfishers do the same thing, except they're flying and diving. But it's really cool to watch. And it's a good reminder that a beak shape does not only come from its diet, but it comes also with their hunting style. Patient ambushes versus a high-speed pursuit. Filtering versus crushing. The heron, the egret face, is a strategy for it to capture its food. Then comes the one that I'm always excited when I get a chance to see. It is sometimes called the murder bird, but it's a shrike. And before we leave birds completely, it's the one species that has a perfect bridge basically into being a songbird that technically is able to kill things easily. Small, perching bird, nowhere near the size of a hawk. It's a predator that eats insects, lizards, small rodents. It doesn't have talons strong enough to do the killing like a hawk does. So what it has is a hooked beak that's almost identical in shape to a raptor's. Yet it's a entirely different family of birds. And so shrikes, like I said, are often called butcher birds or murder birds because they actually impale their prey on thorns, barbed wire, and anchor it while they take it down. So they use the environment as a secondary weapon in their eating. This is a great example of when basically two unrelated critters has the same kind of a mechanism. The shrike has the hooked beak, but it's not related to the hawk. And so it needs to have a same tool, but they're not closely related to each other. So that's kind of the perfect setup for what we're going to talk about next. So when we leave the bird area, let's take a look at what we have as snapping turtles. I don't know if you've ever seen snapping turtles. I luckily live in this place where I get to see a fair amount of turtles, usually painted turtles or box turtles. But then every once in a while I saw a Blanding's turtle, then snapping turtle that was on a trail I was on that was laying eggs. But a snapping turtle, if you look at its jaw up close, it looks like a little bit like a hawk. It sort of has a hawk beak at the end of it. It's a hook in the upper jaw on the snapping turtle that does the same thing that the raptor's beak does. It clamps down to tear, not to chew. And turtles don't have teeth at all. So that horned structure that it has at the end of its face does double duty of both grabbing whatever it's going to eat and then cutting it. It's a different class of animal entirely, reptile, not bird, but the same kind of mechanism of how it feeds itself. And it handles prey that's too big to swallow whole in that same way. If you think about pelicans versus alligators, this is a fun contrast because a pelican and an alligator have enormous mouths relative to their bodies that they do different things with compared to their size. So a pelican's pouch is a scoop in its mouth that can scoop up a huge amount of water and then strains it. It gets fish, it contracts little crustaceans, and the pouch water drains back out into the whatever it is, and they keep the fish and the crayfish and whatever it caught inside the mouth. It's volume-based hunting, like net hunting. So it will go through speed and surface area. While the alligator's mouth is a completely opposite philosophy. It's not about volume, it's about clamping force. Alligators have one of the strongest bites of any animal, but very weak muscles for opening the jaw. So that's why when you actually see a gator hold its mouth shut, you can actually do that very easily. Like you've seen, I don't know if you've ever gone to Florida and see alligator wranglers, but they can hold the mouth shut very easily. They don't have strong jaw muscles in there. And you wouldn't want to do it. Don't do that. But it's the same kind of a big mouth category with the opposite strategy. I'm here to keep my mouth closed around whatever it is I found. Think about to the anteater snout. If a hummingbird's beak is about precision probing then the anteater's snout is kind of the same idea, but almost to an absurd extreme. It's this long, tubular, tiny mouth opening with the very tip of it that houses a tongue that can be over 2 feet long in some species. And it's covered in sticky saliva, flicking in and out in like dozens of times per minute into an anthill or termite tunnels. And its face is essentially a housing tool for this mouth. There's barely a mouth in there, but in the way we think of about a mouth, but its entire head is there to extract ants and termites. So it's pretty cool about that. So the underlying principle running throughout this entire thing is that basically the form of the face follows the food. What can it reach? What can it grab? How can it process the food? How can it use either force or precision or tearing or filtering? Is it patient or is it a sheer ambush power? There's the face, when you look at either a beak or a snout, every curve, length, texture that we can see is basically there to keep it to feed it. And there to make sure that it can bring back food for its young as well. So if we think, like I said, the shrike with its hawk hooked bill, the snapping turtle having a beak in the same way that we might think of a raptor, it shows you that essentially these are the kinds of animals that do a similar kind of hunting. And the practical takeaway with all of this is that the next time you go out birding or you're out out for a hike, before you even open up a field guide or pull up an app, just look at the face first and ask yourself 3 small questions. Is it short and thick? Is it long and thin? A short and thick usually means crushing seeds, nuts, hard shells. Is it long and thin? That usually means either probing nectar or probing in the mud, picking up small insects out of a bark and crevice. Is it straight or hooked, whatever their face is? Straight generally means the purpose is for spearing, while hooked almost means it's for tearing something up and ripping it apart. And whether you look at a bird the size of an eagle or the size of a sparrow, we can determine exactly what it is it's trying to accomplish by looking at its face. Is it filtering or scooping like a duck or a spoonbill or a pelican, or narrow and pointed like single prey hunting? And so when you run those questions through, you usually can get into the right neighborhood, at least what kind of family it is. Even before you look at the size and the color, it's always the first filter, and it works because critters' faces give you the idea of its whole lifestyle. I remember when I was out in California, I saw something and I didn't know what it was. And the very first thing I try to do when I'm someplace I don't know what the local birds are, when I go out to California or when I went to India, am I looking at an eagle? I can look at the face and tell you. Am I looking at a crossbill? They have a very distinct kind of bill that crosses, very good for seed opening. Or does it have a finch face? You can kind of generally get the idea of the family by looking right at its face. All right, everyone, thanks so much. I appreciate you listening to this with me. I hope this makes you appreciate nature right outside your front door even more. You can find everything I do at jillfromthenorthwoods.com. Appreciate you being out there. And you can find all the ways, podcasts, ways of contacting me at jillfromthenorthwoods.com. And I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much and have a great week.